playing a true vintage J45 from Gibson, Montana. I'll take a minute or two and tell you a little bit of what I've learned about wood, some of the characteristics and why selections of wood are used, what are traditional, why we're looking outside the box. Gibson, corporate-wide, has decided to embrace responsible use of materials wherever we can, and have this year endeavored to put every instrument that we build a complete package of FSC certified wood, meaning that we can trace the origin of harvest all the way through our factory and hand you a guitar that we feel was harvested in a responsible manner and that has not brought any shame to the industry in the form of raping the rainforest, as we've been accused of by people playing, you know, vintage guitars that were built in the 30s and they're singing about saving the rainforest. Gibson doesn't want to have a cloud or a shadow on us in any regard. We want to be responsible. We want to learn how to use what's available today and look for what will be available tomorrow. It's a tremendous challenge. We're going to start with top woods. Traditionally, flat top instruments are built with spruce. And there's lots of variety of spruce. It comes from all over the world. It comes from Middle Eastern Europe, comes from Bavaria, comes from North America, Canada, East Coast, West Coast. Wood was originally graded for use in shipbuilding, and the wood that was the lightest for the specific strength was usually spruce of some variety. You could get the greatest longitudinal strength measured over a certain distance, and a deflective amount of pressure would grade the wood. They would say that the spine weight of this wood, and it was always measured with vertical grain. You get the most strength with vertical grain. So we cut absolutely quartered to that, which means that the grain lines would be running this way and the board would be cut out through that, so that we have the greatest strength in the grain line, but we have the least amount of grain in the wood. Because what actually makes the sound of wood is not the grain line, that's the strong part, that's the brittle part. That's the resin that's left for every year when the deposits are left as the moisture retreats to the base of the tree. As it grows in the spring, it runs up, grows a big web, and then in the fall, when the sap begins to drop, you get this hard line or this buildup of sap. Sap's what we make glue out of. It's resin. So it's harder to push sound laterally through all of these different lines or grain lines, and you'll find that guitar wood traditionally is many close lines together because that's what's currently available in most forests. The way that the wood got used in the early days for building yards and arms and spars for ships was they had to determine what was of the lightest weight and the most strength. So they would measure and come up with a spine weight. Well, as sailing ships gave way to steamships and eventually to, you know, propeller-driven craft, a new industry was born, and that was the aircraft industry, and they found that the same thing held true. Very lightweight, extremely stiff and fibrous was a perfect match for the industry. And so you found now that the wood was being used in another industry. Aircraft was being used for it, and it was selected, but it was still graded the same way. They bought it by spine weight. How much did it weigh versus how strong was it? And that's what they turned into the struts, parts of the airplane that were required. Well, as the country expanded from the East Coast westward, a couple things happened in the period of history that we're talking about. We had the First World War and then eventually the Second World War. Well, a lot of planes were made out of wood predominantly made out of wood for the First World War. and there wasn't as much demand on the forest for anything other than that, and the wood was used or cleared just to make room for people to live. Well, as the country recovered from the war effort and more land was cleared and more cities developed and people spread out, more trees were cut on the East Coast, that spruce that we know today as red spruce or Adirondack spruce eventually was used up. It continued until the Second World War, and again they went back to make some planes out of different types of hardwood, some laminated this time, but pretty much they were looking for that same spine weight, that strong, stiff wood. Having to use wood that wasn't available, they started cruising the timber fields on the West Coast, and they came up with a then substitute for wood that was just as strong, had the same spine weight, but it came from the Western coast, and it was Sitka, and some of it Engelmann. And they found that those trees, to develop the same strength in a given dimensional piece of wood, had to have more grain lines per inch. That's why you'll find in Sitka tops that you have traditionally very fine grains, maybe somewhere in the line of, say, 16 to 20 lines per inch. Each one of those successive lines is a year of growth in the tree. So you've got a lot of lines in a small portion, where earlier instruments, the guitars that we consider the golden age, they were using red spruce or Adirondack spruce, and the wood had or the web in between the grain lines was much wider, that open and clear area. My experience has shown me that the instruments, not only were they older, because I started to observe this in the early 60s, those guitars had a more wood sound. They had a woof to them. They had a warmth and clarity that was different than brand new guitars. Now, brand new guitars in the 60s were not built to replicate those, other than they were just built to be a nice instrument that somebody could purchase and sell. They were not trying to replicate the historic precedent set by the materials that they had available. So you take a guitar that has got a lot of strength because of the grain lines running here, but then for some unknown reason we decide to cut a 4-inch sound hole right in the middle of it. Well, that kind of weakens it. So all of a sudden I've got all this stiff wood from here to here. Not only that, if I could turn this guitar inside out, you'd see that this is X-braced. This brace pattern is what I rely on to drive the signal and support the top, so that when this string is struck, it takes the energy of that movement, drives it through the saddle into this plate of, in this case, rosewood, which is glued securely to the top. It excites by the movement of it. It drives this like, I guess you could liken it to a speaker cone. And so it's driving this diaphragm up and down, which is causing a pumping effect, which is exhausting the air out the sound hole. So in reality, I'm using the braces to keep this thing from blowing up for as long as you own the guitar. I'm not really relying on the growth lines to give me the strength longitudinally. Where I need the strength in a guitar is across here. And so what I'm looking for is the most consistent graduation of grain width. Ideally, I would have grain that, for my choice in Sitka, would be around 8 to 12 lines per inch. It's not harvested that way, but still we try to select for it. I want grain lines there because I want that wood sound between those fine lines of sap that are in there. I want the energy to be able to drive horizontally. I want to drive that sonic movement laterally across the top as even. So if you find guitars that have got incredibly fine grain right in the center, and then real wide grain and real tight grain, and that's the way it comes a lot of times, you'll find a different sonic passage on those, and may be perfect for your ear. But when I'm working toward what I consider the ultimate recipe of building, so that no other variable can be counted as as an oblique, I'm looking for very consistent grain growth. Even if it's narrow, as long as it's consistent, or if it's going to change, that it does it consistently all the way out. I want to have the same characteristics, and that's why we saw a board and we call book matching, where we split one board and glue it together in this orientation, so that that one plank, I have the same characteristics on the left side of the board as I do on the right. That's left over from just good husbandry of lumber that had to be carried out of the forest on somebody's back, and they would split wedges for making carved top violins and such. They didn't have big sawmills. They brought each piece out by itself. So that's a little bit about top wood, why wood is graded the way it is, what's available to the industry, how whatever manufacturer chooses woods that are available. We're not in charge of growing the trees. Leave that to the Lord, and then we try and make the best use of what's brought to our doorstep. In the case of the back and side materials, again, Gibson's very, very concerned with the origin and the chain of custody in all the woods that we do use currently. In addition to that, we are continually looking for additional materials that can be certified and tested as true or considered tone woods. Woods that are considered tone woods not only perform the function of holding the guitar together, but actually will create and enhance the sonic image that is produced, so that the back and sides will add a color and shape to the sound that the top produces. Clearly the top is doing the work. You know, it's the engine, and I guess everything else is there to modify it into the character of sound that we're looking for, or that pleases our ears. We're using English walnut for the first time ever. Just in this last year, we've brought that on board. We've tried different woods throughout the years. We use genuine mahogany, both for necks and backs and sides. We use Indian rosewood. We'll use koa wood, western quilt maple. Each one of these will have a characteristic sound. Some may be warmer, some may be softer, some brighter and crisper. We use quite a lot of Eastern hard rock maple in our guitars. Every one of those instruments and every combination of size and shape delivers a different sonic package. Gibson line is incredibly versatile. From the earliest guitars, when Nick Lucas, the first endorsee of our guitars, came up with the size and shape that he wanted us to build, into the guitar that we don't know about yet, we're still searching for an additional combination to enhance and give more opportunity to the player. Again, this is a true vintage J45.